For today's class, we're going to be working on turning your drafting into paint elevations. The paint elevations help communicate with the shop how the set is actually going to be painted, what it will actually look like. And these are really helpful as you're working on your model because the tool will inform its kind of interpretation. You might use the paint elevations to do your painting for your model, or you might use what you do on your model to inform what choices you make for your paint elevations. Both directions are absolutely fine to go in. So what we want to do is you want to start with your drafting. So you're going to pull up your drafting file. You'll notice in today's example, I am actually using a different set than I used in class on Tuesday. This is so that we have a little bit more variety, so that hopefully something I cover somewhere will butt up close to what you're trying to do for your projects. So the example I'm using today is the 2022 production of Rocky Horror Show. So we are going to look at these little sidewalls that we had over here. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to take your front elevations that you've drafted and you want to pull it off to the side so that you can use that as your paint elevation. So you're going to select the entire wall with your scale figure. You're going to type copy, hit enter. You're going to click and you're going to drag that down and out of the way so it's nice and it is on its own. Next thing you're going to do is I have these are section lines. They were specific to what I needed to communicate for this particular show. You shouldn't have them on yours. I'm going to get rid of those because they're not necessary. After I've done this, I need to go over to my drafting page, so the front elevation that aligns with what you were trying to do, and I am going to turn this into my paint elevations plate. Now, if you remember, we need to change the size of this. So how we're going to do this is we're going to copy it over into another page setup, and then we are going to rescale it down to what we want to do. Now, the reason why we're copying this over is because there's a lot of things that are set up on this drawing that we don't want to lose, and it is actually easier to resize it than it is to start from scratch. So how we do that, we right click, hit duplicate. You'll see that all of a sudden right next to it, I have a new one popped up. You want to rename this, so go to the next number in your sequence of plates. So if you've done 6 plates, then 7 will be your next one. And you're going to do paint elevations and then underscore. And then the name of mine is Upstage Window, so I'm going to call it US Window. So US being the abbreviation for Upstage. So now that we have this, drag this to the very, very end because it is your newest plate. And then we are ready to start resizing. How you resize it? Right click, edit page setup. Go to paper size, click down on manage custom sizes, and then your width is going to be 19 inches wide and your height is going to be 13 inches tall. Once you have that input, click OK, and you will notice that, ta-da, your paper is smaller. Now go ahead and take a minute to get rid of all of those dimensions. I'm kind of deleting them without worry because it's only taking out stuff that's in the paper space. I don't have to worry about deleting anything on my model. So clean that all up. I'm leaving this little label at the bottom because I can use that it'll be helpful for my paint elevation. Next thing that we need to do is, if you remember, our little dashed lines show you where the printable area is on that page. So I want to move everything. So I'm going to select everything. I want to move everything down to that bottom corner into a little bit nicer of a space with that. I'm still leaving it like a nice little 1/8 of an inch or so in because I don't want it to accidentally get chopped off, but it's sitting a little bit closer to our dash line. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to move the outside of our boundary. So left click and drag up to get your green little box that will select everything that it touches. And then you will see a bunch of controls. You will see your 4 corner nodules, but then you'll also see little toggles in the middle. So if you move one of the 4 corners, it might move things out of line. See how that's kind of a weird shape? If you move the middle command, it will drag everything in line without moving things, which is really, really helpful. You'll notice that I am still shifting a little bit, and that's because I need to turn my ortho back on. So make sure that he down here is clicked on when you go to do this. Grab your toggle and then move it in until you are inside that boundary. Now you want to have that math because that's going to tell you how far you need to go. So that's about 1 foot 4¼ inches. So I'm going to do 1 foot 4.25 inches. And then I land nicely inside that little dashed boundary that we see. That means that after I've done that, I can highlight my viewport. I can drag it over 1 foot 4.25 inches, and that's good to go there. That actually clicked the boundary, not the viewport. Then I can go ahead and I can drag the viewport over. There's a border that's right behind the viewport, so that's why it selected one and not the other, but that's fine. And then after I got those guys, I'm noticing that my title for my drawing is here. I'm gonna go ahead and move him so he doesn't get confused with all of the stuff that's on my title block. And then I'm gonna move my title block. Again, my 1 foot 4.25 inches. And there we go. So everything is now as wide as it needs to be. So now we need to change how tall it is. So it's the exact same thing what we just did. Select your outer border, drag it down, figure out what that measurement is. I'm gonna say for mine, I'm noticing that it really wants to go to, it wants to click to the actual drafting that's behind it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to get it out into the middle of nowhere so that it's not picking up on any of that. So if you run into trouble like that, just change where you're at in your drafting, and that gives you the ability to have it not want to magically toggle to something that you don't want it to toggle to. So I'm going to stretch this down, and then I see my math right there is saying 10.5 is probably going to be in the happy range. So I'm going to do 10.5 inches, enter. And yep, that puts me right inside of my dashed lines. So our new measurement for all of that is 10.5. So 10.5 inches. And then for the viewport, we can just drag and drop that. If your object snap is on, it will go right to that border. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take this little info, and this is like a disclaimer. I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I don't need him for my paint elevation. And I'm going to click all of this. I'm going to move it down 10.5 inches. And then there we go. So now we have our UMW Theater. We have the name of our show. We have our notes. Some of your notes will be consistent between your front elevations and your paint elevations. You'll notice for mine, it says back with visqueen or similar translucent plastic. That's what I am saying I want the windows to be made out of. And then it says this plate shows wall C, wall D, and wall E in relationship to each other. Those are both still true. So I'm going to leave those on there. I am then going to rename it. So the title of it is Upstage Window, but it's the paint elevation. So I'm going to do paint elevation. And then technically this is made of 3 walls, but I'm calling all of them together the Upstage Window. So I'm going to do Upstage Window. And then I want to rename it so it's the correct sheet number, which will be 7. And I am good to go. Later on, I'm going to need to come back and change that scale to reflect what my scale is going to be and change the date. You'll want the date to be the same date that you completed this. So keep that in mind. Now I need to get to my paint elevation. So I'm going to double click into there. Make sure that you're unlocked down here. Use your scroll and pan to get over into that new little section that you did. And then you're going to have to figure out what scale you want it to be in. I'm going to start with 1/4 inch. That's really tiny. So I'm going to go up from there. Try 3/8. 3/8 is looking pretty good. I'm wondering if I can get away with 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch does show a lot of paint, but what I am noticing is I need to fit my person on it. So if I want to do this, I'm going to need to bring my scale figure over slightly so that he fits in where everything is at. And then I have my baselines to show where the floor is. I'm going to get rid of those because they run off of the border and they look a little bit sloppy. So I've got those guys off. I know that the first thing that I need to do is to lock it down. So I'm going to lock it. And then I'm going to take that label for it and I'm going to move it. I'm going to take that label for it. I'm going to move it down. Always double check if you're in your paper space or your model space. So for this, you'll notice that I'm really close to the outside. You might have some really tight details in here that it's helpful to see. So you might want it to be close, but this is almost too big. If you don't need to show tight little details, you might want to go down to the next smaller size just so that it's not like crowding in all that you have. So now that I have this, I am ready to, I'm going to go over here to my scale. I'm going to say 1/2 inch equals 1, and then change your date. Everything looks fine. So to get this into Photoshop, I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Print. I'm going to, printer is drawing to PDF, save as PDF, and then I'm going to label it something that makes sense. Rocky paint elevation works fine for me. I'm going to save that. Now I'm completely done with AutoCAD. Make sure that you save what you're working on. It's always good practice in case you need to go back and grab it. And then next we're going to pull up Photoshop. So as a reminder, you have access to Photoshop via Campus. So if you go to the home page, there is information from the Digital Knowledge Center right here. You can use Photoshop on any of the computers in the DKC, or you can access it through Apps Anywhere. So click on the Apps Anywhere tab on the DKC site that's linked on the home page, and it will show you all of the information you need to stream the software that you are using. So if you need to get it set up, here is where you find out how to do that. And then you should be ready to go. Now, once you're ready to use Photoshop, you're going to go to Open, get that file that you just did. So your paint elevations, open it up. Again, make sure that it says crop to media box, because if you go to any of the others, it could trim to something you don't want it to. You want it to be the exact size that you exported from AutoCAD. So go to media box. I also like to convert it over to inches just because we don't work in pixels, we work in inches. Make sure that the resolution is in 300 because that's going to give you the best color quality, and make sure that your mode is in RGB and hit OK. Now you will notice that this gives you your drawing with a whole bunch of fun little transparency boxes on it. What this means is that there is no background, except for you can see on the little UMW border right there. So we need to first make this so that it has a background. Now what you do in order to be able to do this is you need to be able to see your layers. Apparently I can see mine. They're just hiding over to the side. So there you go. So if you're having trouble finding out where all of this is at, talk to me or do a quick Google, but you want to be able to see what are the different layers that you're working on, because it's going to be very, very important for you as you go. So you can see here that we have layer 1. Layer 1 is that base layer that was in our Rocky Paint Elevations file. In order to make it so it's no longer transparent, we're going to do right click, flatten image. All of a sudden we see it's white. It means that this is one solid thing, you cannot see through it, and that will be very, very helpful for us. Now what we want to do as we're working with our layers is we want to name them so that they make sense for what we're using them for. So we're going to, if you notice, I just clicked on that lock right there. I unlocked it so I have the ability to do things with this layer. And then I'm going to rename it as line work. And you'll notice that for every thing that I bring in here, I'm going to rename it something that fits for what that is. So watch me consistently keep playing with that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what the heck is going on with my walls. So For these walls, this is kind of an industrial room. So it's got a lot of plaster and concrete for the walls. So we're going to do plaster for the columns and then kind of like a concrete cinder block for the actual tops and bottoms that we see going on here. You will notice that there is a break between this big window. And the reason for that is in this show, there was a platform that went through here, and this wall sat underneath the platform, and this wall sat on top of the platform. We're not going to put anything in there because that's not a section that gets painted. So, work of the original design for this show. The entire idea is that the paint treatment continues on because it's one big window below and above that. So, we'll kind of treat it as if it's one big wall, even though there is a little bit of a section missing out here. So first things that I want to do is I want to go over to figure out where I'm going to get my textures from. So we talked about how you can do texture.com. So there is a good place to go. If you want to look for free, click the free content and you can start trying to find a whole bunch of different textures. They have a bunch of different, this energy pole is quite fun for, you know, those kind of big concrete poles that you'll see places. So there's a big expanse of concrete that could work for. There is this cinder block, which is what we used in class the other day, which is our stone wall there. Make sure that you're looking for something that's the right shape because you'll notice this is a little bit squared off. Maybe you want something that's a little bit more of a rectangle. So take time to look for the thing that fits best for what you want it to do. Now for those plaster columns, I really want something rough. So I kind of love this abstract that I have here. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to choose, it says image 3, image 4, and image 5. So you look at what are the difference between those. There's a little bit of a difference with the pattern. So I'm going to choose the one that looks best for what I am going for. And then I'm going to click download. And you can do small, medium, or large. That depends on how big the image size is. So if you want to play around with that, you can. Then go back over to Photoshop. I'm going to go to open, go to my downloads. And then I'm going to find out where it just dropped that at. There we go. I'm going to open it. And then as a reminder, in order to do anything to it, you have to unlock the image. So unlock that background. Go to the little move tool, which is this little plus sign that we have over at the top. And then when that is done, you select the image and you can drag and drop it over into where you want to use. It's saying the target has a different depth in the source document. That's fine for the sake of what we're doing now. So we now have this where we want it to be. Now we talked about how you need to rescale it. So make sure that your show transform controls is on up here. Come to the little side corner. And again, this will stretch it and skew it. If you want to keep it in proportion, hold down on shift as you hold it open, and then you can rescale it to where you need it to go. You might find that in some cases, stretching it is fine. You'll have to do that on a case-by-case basis. Now, as a reminder, we want to use the line work to kind of mask everything behind it. So what I am going to do is I'm going to come over to my line work layer. I am going to use this little quick select magic wand down here. So if you look at all of these, you want the magic wand. I got that by right clicking on this tool. And then you're going to click, hold down shift to click multiple things. I have all of these done. And after I have all of those, I can delete the white out from the middle, and all of a sudden I get my, and then you can right click to deselect. All of a sudden I get my my plaster. Now, so this is the moment where you look at it and you go, is that what I thought it was going to look like? I think that looks a little bit rougher than I expected it to look. So I'm going to try something else because it doesn't hurt to go look for something else. So I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to look for a plaster texture. I'm going to go over to images. I'm going to see, is there something that, ooh, I kind of like this one. This is more like what was in my head. So I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to bring it over. I'm going to say, maybe we try that instead. So I just copy pasted it. It went right above where I was at, and I can see this is a better texture for what I was looking for. So just because you used something doesn't mean that it's right. Make sure that you find the thing that fits what you want it to actually look like in your head, and don't be afraid to look for something else. I'm going to stretch this so that it goes into the space I need it to fill. I'm allowing it to transform a little bit because I had this big section right at the top right here that's very, very plain. I don't want that. So again, sometimes kind of playing around with the shape and size of it is fine. And then I'm going to look at that and I'm going to rename that plaster columns so that I know exactly what that layer is. Now looking at this, I can go, what if I twirled it around? How do I need to reshape it to be what I want? Looking at this, I think it's a little bit lighter than I want it to be. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go up to, I'm going to hit enter because I was just moving it around. So it wants me to complete that. I'm going to go to image. I'm going to go to adjustments. And then there's a whole bunch of things I can play around with. I can play around with brightness and contrast so I can make it darker. I can bump the contrast up, or I can make it so the contrast is softer and fuzzier. What that does is this makes it so that the middle colors are like no longer there. So it's absolute lights and darks. This makes it so there's a lot more gray in the middle. I can also go to adjustments. I can go to hue saturation. So I can play around with how saturated it is. This will usually make it look a little bit warmer. This will make it look closer to grayscale. I can still play with lightness and darkness in here. So I can bump it a little bit like that. And then another one that I can use is I can go to adjustments and I can go to curves. So curves is quite fun. You play with the pick points on this and it can pop what we would call like your black point, the actual like dark shadows of that. And just see if you find something that fits, again, what you're looking for. So now I have my plaster columns. Now I need my concrete wall. So I had plaster for that one. Now I'm going to look for more of a could go look at a more traditional concrete. I did mention that I wanted a concrete texture that had the blocks in it. So what I would do in order to do that, and you can see here how you have a little bit of a difference for that concrete. I feel like this screams Rocky Horror. Watch out, you don't want the watermark for those images over it. So pay attention to what one you find, because if you do find that, you will get that on your picture. I am actually going to play around with, I'm going to show you what happens if we take that and we overlay it over our plaster, because this might be really fun. So I dragged and dropped that. There's that little crayon icon. I'm going to get him down so he's out of the way there. Okay, so what I'm thinking is this could tone what's going on with the plaster columns quite interestingly. So I'm going to drop that layer. I'm going to call this concrete overlay. Again, just something that makes sense for what I want it to be. I'm going to click that layer and then I can adjust what's going on with the layer. So I can change it to multiply so that we can see. Notice how when it's on normal, you don't see anything underneath it. When we go to multiply, you get the actual shape of the plaster underneath there. And then you can go to opacity and turn down the opacity so it's not showing up super strong. So that could do something fun to kind of help tone and make those a little bit more HD. You can play with what is, again, what's that layer doing over it. So multiply basically allows it to show what's going on the layer underneath it. So you can choose if you want to do that to kind of make something look a little bit more interesting or dimensional, or you could choose just to have your original plaster. Another thing that you could do is you can go to the plaster columns layer. You can make a little box. So you'll notice I went up to the rectangle tool up here. You can make a little box, go like this. And then I'm going to come down to see where this paint bucket is. If I right click, there's a gradient tool. I have white and black are my two colors right now. could drop that in. But I can also play with, again, what's the opacity there? So maybe we have a little bit of a gradient that's going on with our columns because we just put a little lightness to darkness going above it. So all kinds of fun things that you can do. Next, we're going to go for our concrete cinder block. So I find the one that works for what I want my set to be. I copy that, take it over. And then this one's going to sit behind what we did for our plaster because it is sitting behind that in profile in the drawing. So we're going to take this back over here. You're going to want to go to your line work. You're going to want to, again, woo, that was the magic eraser tool. We're going to do the select, because if we do select, then we can take that off a couple of things. So we can take that off the line work layer. We can also take it off the plaster columns. This will make it so that we can see what's going through underneath that. You can even take it off that gradient if you wanted to, but that gradient is existing outside of it. So you can come to here. Your layer 1 is going to be your cinder block. And then you can take and change the size of that cinder block. If you want big cinder block for your set, if you want small cinder block, whatever that scale is, you can start making it fit the size and shape of your set. When you have what you want, you can right click on your layer, click duplicate layer, okay, and then you are going to move that over. Duplicate layer, move it over. And then there you go. Now you'll notice that one of the things that the layers do is that they take the name of whichever layer is on top. So I just moved that to the top so that when I merge these layers, I have cinder block and not cinder block copy 3 or something chaotic like that. Now, if I want to get those down to here, what I can do is, well, actually first I want to point out when I just did that and I moved that cinder block to the top, you'll notice I have this little line here where one is sitting over the other. So before I do anything, I want to take my little rectangle tool. I'm going to come in the middle of this and I'm just going to delete that top one. That makes it so I don't have a weird layer line going on right there. I can go to my cinder block copy 2. I can move. Oh, there we go. I can move that over so all of a sudden they're all lining up nice and neat. And now I can merge them together. So now that I have those, I can duplicate the entire thing, can hit OK, and I can move them down so they go here. And you can see how we have that fun difference in color because I had put the gradient on. If you don't want the gradient, it would look like this, where you have your plaster and all of your colors. So you might want a little bit of toning when you get to the top. You might not. These are all decisions that you can make. And if you want help, you can ask for help with how to do it. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to get the actual window treatment itself. So for this set, I had the actual framing of the windows, the casing of the window itself was a dark gray, and then all of the interior stuff was like a wrought iron. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just drop a color that is the gray that I want into that fill. And the reason why is because it is not enough surface area that a texture is really going to do anything. So I clicked on the color. There is the foreground color is the one in front, the background color is the one in the back. You want the foreground color, find the shade that you want it to be. You can also pick a color out from what you already have, if that's helpful to you. And then now that you have that, remember how I went over to your gradient and it had been the color paint bucket before? Right click on that gradient tool, go to paint bucket, and then that will let you just drop it in. I'm going to come back to line work because I want it to go right into those lines. And then fun fact, if you are trying to drop it in here, you'll notice that little arrow is really hard to figure out where it's lining up. In order to get the crosshairs that we talked about in class, make sure that your caps is on, and then I can see exactly where I'm dropping it into as I go. If it's hard for you to see, just zoom in. You can always zoom and move your stuff around. And once you are done, you're ready to put in the black for what's going on in the middle. So now that I have all of those sections with their dark gray, I can go down to my black, or you can choose, we're gonna do something really fun just to show some fun contrast, and we can say, what happens if I make that red? Doing this for contrast. This is not necessarily what you guys will want to do for your sets. Again, this is just for a fun example. And just like that, you should be finished. It is worth noting that I used red to have a more exciting color for this demonstration. Make sure that you are doing research to make sure that the color that you use is actually correct for what you're trying to achieve, but this is a more exciting pop of color than maybe that original black would have been. Doesn't mean that's the right choice, but it means that it is a choice to be made. So make sure that you're thinking through everything that you are doing. Next, what we want to do is we want to go and we want to figure out what the windows themselves are going to be. So we can do either that same magic select tool that we had before, or we can go to our magic eraser tool. So right click, make sure you're on magic eraser right there. Again, if you're on caps lock, your little crosshairs will be there. Make sure that you're on the line work layer, and then you can just kind of delete all of those guys. You will notice that I have all of my plaster showing up behind me. So when I go to put in my windows, I'll want them to be in front of the plaster layer. All right, so for the actual windows, what I'll want to do is I will want to go and look up. If I look at windows, I can look at, this is use your fun descriptive words. Dirty, broken window. I can try to find these. I will notice that maybe I'm looking for window panes and not the actual whole window, or maybe I can kind of hodgepodge them from things that I see. So maybe I see this little derelict factory here is actually quite an interesting image. So maybe I can click on that and see what else I find. I quite like this picture, so maybe I want to use this as my example. If you were doing a cleaner window, this might not be the picture that you want to use. So it's choose the window that looks the best for what you're doing. You can use your little rectangle to select what you want, and then you can do select inverse and delete. So that's only going to get me what I actually want to keep from that. And then I can bring this up here, put it over behind my line work layer, and then I can drag it to fit the actual scale for what is going on with my windows, which is quite cool. Now you'll notice that I have these 3 windows, but then I have this 4th guy over there. I could just get rid of this, or I could create a layer via cut, make a new layer with him, and I could bring him down here. And what's nice with that is when I go to actually copy this guy and make more layers, I can do duplicate layer. Okay. And then I can actually even do things like I can make him the reverse of what he was, and then put him down somewhere else. Can play with where he's at so that it's not this one repeating pattern that I see all over the place. So again, you can play around with how wide they are. Some of my windows get a little bit skinnier than other windows, so there's a lot of trying to figure that out. And then I have these 3 windows right here that are kind of like nice little default windows for what everything looks like. So maybe I want to do like layer via copy on that one. I don't want to get rid of my original layers. click on top of that layer via copy. So I'm not taking him away from everything else, but now all of a sudden I have an extra guy that I can kind of put in places and then copy him around as much as I want to. And then from there, you can kind of start putting all of your layers where you want them to go. You'll notice that I'm not merging them together right now because I'm kind of liking them being a little bit separate for the sake of what I'm doing. So for example, if I want to come put these over here, I can stretch these all together and then just copy that and paste it down. And then there we go. Likewise, I can take, you know, other sections that aren't quite so copied and crazy. You'll have to kind of keep track of where all these guys are at. It's nice because if you look over at the side, you can kind of see the thumbnail of where they all are. So I can help you figure out which ones are which. So maybe I want to copy that guy and use that guy for just a small section with broken windows there. And you'll notice that there's some muttons and mullions in that picture, so some of these I might need to play around with. And if you do auto select, then whichever one you click on, it will actually pick up that. So you can choose which one you're choosing to copy. And you'll notice if I stretch that a little bit wider, it might kind of change around that pattern a little bit. So keep doing that. And then I can go and using my tool, I can figure out again, are there any edges that are kind of weirdly bleeding over, looking a little bit strange? All right, now that I have all of these crazy numbers of layers, I can take and combine all of those guys together. I'm going to merge those layers and I'm going to call them window. And all of a sudden my layers just got a lot more manageable, right? So over here, this is a fairly clean drawing. You can see again, your line work, which is the lines for everything that you're using. You can see the windows. You can see if we want to turn the gradient tool on, that's what it would look like if we want that look. You can see your plaster columns, your cinder block. Oh, we can actually move those two guys together. Just try to keep it as simple as possible because I'll make it really easy for you to do. And by the time you're done, you have a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like. Now with the windows, you might want to go, but that looks really hard and opaque. So again, you can go up to image and adjustments and you can play along with like, how do they look? To try to get the perfect fit that you want them to be. Although we did say that this is backed with Visqueen, which is basically, Visqueen is a, for those of you who haven't used it, is a heavyweight plastic. If you back it with that, you still want to have a paint treatment on it because you still want it to look a certain way unless it's a perfectly clean window. And if it's a perfectly clean window, then you need to communicate that too. So make sure that you're making this all look how you want it to look after it is finished and on your stage. The next thing that you'll want to pay attention to is go over to your color tool, select a nice light gray, because you'll want to take your paint bucket tool and drop that, make sure you're on your line work layer, into your scale figure because he should show up against the background. He doesn't need to be super, super dark, so I would actually even go maybe a little bit lighter than that. just enough to show up so that your scale figure is visible. And then you'll see here, I didn't change this because I was in a hurry to do this demonstration for you, but this should say front elevation, upstage window. So make sure that that's changed in your drafting before you bring it over. When you are done, you can save this. And what I usually do is I do save as, and then I do layers. I always do a Photoshop PDF because it's easier to share places. There you go. Save PDF. You're good to go. This will save all of those individual layers for you. If you go to submit this and the file size is too big and Canvas has a coronary, how you can decrease the file size is you can go to File, Save a Copy, and then you can switch that to a PNG. There you go. Click Save, and it will make it a smaller sized file for you. It is important to note that if you save it as a PNG, you will not have all the layers, so you cannot go back and fix anything. If you save it as a PDF, you do get to keep the layers. So if you do, make sure that the first time you save it as a PDF so that if you need the layers and you need to fix things for your final, you can go back in there and you can fix things. But if you want it as a smaller file size, you can do the PNG. So it'll be 2 different files on your computer, and that is fine. When you are done, upload it to Canvas, and ta-da, you are finished with your paint elevation. Congratulations.